Meredith, thank you so much for joining me. I'm really excited to have you here today. Meredith is the owner of Ethos, and I'll let you kind of take it away and tell us what Ethos is all about.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me too, Candice. So Ethos is a low waste shop and refillery in Capitola Village in Santa Cruz. So we specialize in products that aim to help you reduce the waste that you create in just your everyday life. So all of the products are usually plastic free, they're recyclable, they're reusable, they're refillable. So we also have a refillery, so you can come and bring your own containers, purchase our containers, and refill anything from shampoo to laundry detergent to face wash, like you name it, even toothpaste tablets. So it's just thinking about everyday waste that we create and how we can find alternatives. So that's what we do.
And how did you decide to do this? Like, what was the journey from before you were an entrepreneur to deciding to open your own zero waste shop?
Oh my gosh, it's been quite a journey. So I was actually a practicing women's health nurse practitioner for 10 years. My family and I kind of got inspired to start trying to decrease our waste after hearing about a woman in Marin who she and her family of four or five, I can't remember. They just produced a mason jar, like a small mason jar worth of trash over the course of a year. And
Wow.
yeah, we heard about her and we were like, what? Like, how? Like, what about your toothpaste tubes? What about, pens? What about, like, we just started asking ourselves all these questions. And the aim wasn't really to like have zero waste, because I still to this day contend like that is impossible and it's an impossible standard. But we just started kind of making these swaps. And then fast forward a couple of years later, we decided to take a year off and travel around the world with my husband and I and our two kids. And it was in the course of that travel that we just saw trash every single place we went, plastic pollution. We saw places we'd been 20 years prior that were just like devastated by plastic pollution, because of course it's something that's impacted us most over the last like 30 years. And so it just became this mission that, I really wanted to focus more on. And that's how the shop like came to life.
What are the sort of effects that you're seeing now that you have this shop? Like, are people amazed by what's possible? Like,
Yeah.
what have
Yeah.
you learned through this?
Oh my God. Well, just like as an entrepreneur, who'd never done anything in the entrepreneur world, I've learned a lot personally. But in terms of like plastic pollution and awareness, it has just grown and grown and grown over the years. And the first year we were in business, and granted, we've only been in business for 3.5 years now. The first year, people were just kind of like, like really taking it in. And there'd be some pretty like, wax wraps were an example of like they're like a piece of fabric that's covered with wax coating, and you can use it in place of plastic wrap. That was like eye-opening to people. And now we've seen an evolution that like most people have seen those types of things, and it's a little bit more obscure things that they're like, oh, toothpaste tablets, like I've heard of those. And so I think just the awareness is there that these products exist, and most people just haven't encountered them in real life and gotten their hands on them. But I think it's really just that people want to find solutions that they can do in their day-to-day lives. And that's been what's so cool, is how people feel empowered. Like, oh, I just am so happy I've gotten rid of the plastic shampoo bottles, or whatever it is we just hear these statements day in and day out, and it's really so rewarding to have these interactions. So it's been great.
I find your business to be so inspiring, and I feel so fortunate to have been able to help you when you needed a little bit of help along the way. And I invited you here to ask you some questions about your employee handbook.
Yeah.
That's one of the things I help small businesses with. And I'm curious, why did you decide to have an employee handbook? Like, where were you at on your journey of being a business owner and having employees before you started down that path?
It was fairly early on in the journey. I think we were maybe like 6 months old. And Jenna Lee from Yoso, she suggested that I reach out to you because I just kept having questions that related to employees, as we were starting to hire more, because when we first started out, it was myself and one other person. And so there, like, we didn't need a lot of structure. And then as we've so slowly grown, and now we're a team of 7, it's just become so important to be able to have these standards that we can refer back to know that everyone is on the same page. You came so highly recommended, not just by Jenna Lee, but then also, I encountered a couple other business people who were like, oh, Fotress and Flourish, you need to go through them. And so I was like, well, that's it.
Oh, I'm so glad
Yeah.
to hear that. I remember like working on your handbook together. Was it before pandemic?
Yes.
I think it was. Yeah, it was like before the whole world changed.
Before the world changed. Yes.
It's been a long time. You're actually one of the first companies that I created a handbook for inside of Fotress and Flourish as a company. So,
that's cool. I didn't know that.
yeah, it was really wonderful to work on your handbook with you. And I'm curious now that you have this handbook, like how do you use it? Like, what are the kinds of things that are useful about it? Like how your employees find out about it?
Yeah. So we use it all the time. In fact, even just this morning, well, over the weekend, like we had a little like issue come up with a customer, and we have a harassment policy in there, and we were just revisiting it and looking at it and seeing, how does this apply to this situation. So it has come in handy time and time again. The way that we structure it is that when we onboard new employees, we give them a copy of the handbook, and then they, sign that they've received it. So the expectation is that they read through all of it so that they're aware of all the policies. It's evolved over time in that we've sort of merged it to also include a lot of our like shop systems, because there's kind of a nice harmony there of like, what's your, return policy and things like that. It's like everything you need to know. So it's pretty funny. In like our last staff meeting, they started referring to it as mom. So they're like, oh, just go ask mom. Mom will know. And so everybody has like, we have a binder with each register. And so they'll be like, oh, so just consult mom, and you pull out mom and like, look, and they've got the table of contents and everything. So it's like the real life application is not just this binder that we created and is like getting dusty somewhere. It's something that we're constantly looking at. And we just revised it maybe a month ago.
Yeah, something that's really stood out with you as a client is that whenever there's something that's in the handbook where you're like, this doesn't quite fit with what we're doing, you constantly reach out in like a great way and ask, like, can we change this? Like, how can we do this differently? So I'm curious, how do you identify when that's happening? How do you know that it's time to maybe make a shift or ask a question?
Yeah, I mean, it's been on a case by case basis. Like, so we are going to be opening a new location, which is huge, and just, as part of revamping it is because, again, as you bring more and more people on board and involved, the situations change. So like we were revisiting our vacation policy. So instead of doing like a lump sum, what I wanted to do is start, having it be an accrual basis. And that's where I reached out to you. Like, how do you go from, doing things one way to another, and making sure that everyone is on the same page so that no one is, caught off guard by changes or changes in policy. So that's really just been like, as things arise, then we go back to it and we're like, okay, now we need to change that so that everyone knows.
Yeah, I appreciated that conversation because it wasn't just about, can I change this policy? It was also about, how do I explain this to my staff? What are the things that I should be thinking about as I am making this change? What's the best way to implement it? Like, do I want to do it now? Do I wait to the beginning of the year? And
Yeah, and that's
yeah,
what I've appreciated, being able to ask for your input, is like, what's the best way to go about doing these things? Not just how do I write a policy, but it's like, how do I handle these situations, gently, knowing that I do have like the business and the employees' overall well-being in mind.
yeah. Do you have any advice for people who are newer to having employees, newer to starting a business, in like standardizing practices with all of them, and creating clear and consistent messages with your team?
Yeah, I mean, I think starting before you start to have employees, coming up with the handbook, because it does force you to think about what you want your take to be on different aspects of the business. So it's, the more you can have the systems in place before you bring people on, that's going to help you just to have a good foundation. And that's something that I didn't know. I feel like I just kind of stumbled into Candice's welcoming arms, and she was like, yes, you do need this. It's good to have. And now I'm so glad that I do. And it's become the springboard for doing lots of other policies and lots of other, systems that the employees found so useful, that they're able to look back on this. Even when a manager isn't on, they can look and, come up with answers. So it's,
Consult mom.
yeah, mom's
Yeah.
everything, right? So that's where that came from.
Yeah, yeah. I'm curious to know too, this is like in a little bit of a different vein of questioning, not so much about handbooks anymore, but is there something that you have learned recently? And I'm curious to know what that is and how you learned it.
As a person or as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, person, entrepreneur, as a whole human being.
Interesting. Ooh.
When I interviewed people for jobs, this was one of the
Yeah.
questions that I used to ask, and it's one of my favorite questions. So I thought I would ask
Oh.
you.
Well, I guess I could think like, even just today, and this does relate to the business, and kind of does take us back to the harassment, or like customer interactions that we were talking about. The difference between, and I had never put my finger on it, the difference between, if there's something that someone is doing that you don't want them to do, it's kind of like with children, where instead of saying don't do that, it's like redirecting or coming up with like a positive, oh, I'm sorry, you can't look at that, but would you like to? Da, da, da? It's totally applies to
Mhm.
children, but it was like I hadn't put my finger on it in terms of like an approach to customer service that maybe isn't innate to everyone, or they hadn't really thought about it. And maybe it helped coming from healthcare to kind of have that, you need to keep people like on your team, so that you're working towards a shared goal, that kind of same philosophy, I guess. It's, yeah.
The redirect.
The redirect. Yeah. Yeah.
That's a good one. One that I learned. in restaurants when I was doing HR in restaurants was the walking with the person out of the store, where you
Oh,
start a conversation with them and you end the conversation just outside of the door, and then they're already outside
you're
and
like,
most
oh,
of the time they leave.
I guess I'm
Yeah.
on my way. Yeah. Yeah. Ooh, that's a good one. That's a good
Yeah.
one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to ponder that question throughout the rest of the day, though. Like, what have I learned recently? Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have been learning recently about this term that I've never really heard of before, which is called primitive accumulation, which is in the transition from feudalism to capitalism, how work was made into a commodity and like embodied in different ways. And I know like just enough about this to get myself into trouble. So I'm not going
Yeah.
to say any
Yeah.
more about it, but this is something that I'm learning about right now.
That's really interesting. Oh,
Yeah.
another thing comes to mind too. My husband, I don't know, he gets this newsletter called Future Crunch, which
Ooh,
is
okay.
basically, yeah, he loves it. It's basically positive news, and it's a lot
Hmm.
of it relates to climate. And so he'll like read me little snippets of it, but one thing that he's gotten really into is this idea of what's it called, future punk, no, solar punk. So
Oh, what
there's
is
like
that?
steampunk, yeah, so
Yeah.
it's basically, if you can imagine, like Wakanda in the Black Panther, it's like this idealistic future society. It's usually like buildings that have lots of plants, and they have like
Mm,
water collection systems and things like that. But it started out as kind of like an art form, and now it's informed like fiction writers and all kinds of things. But it's a really interesting idea of like not being limited to the here and now, but like dreaming about this idealistic future society.
that is so interesting. That makes me think of the book Ecotopia, which was written decades ago, I think, but it was a imagining of the future in a way that would be sustainable and regenerative and restorative for everyone. And
Yeah, yeah. So it's kind of the antithesis to the like apocalyptic, like climate change, the world's ending. Instead, it's like, oh, there's this like solar powered, speed train systems and stuff like people are just, things are moving so efficiently and sustainably. So yeah, he's really into that, which is fun.
nice. Thanks
Yeah,
for sharing.
yeah, yeah, of course.
And if listeners would like to find you, if they're in Santa Cruz or if they're around the world, where do they find you?
Yeah, lots of places. So you
Okay.
can find us in Capitola Village. We are located very centrally down there, right on the little corner across from Mijo's Taqueria. So come get a taco while you're down there. Um, you also can go to our website, which is ethossantacruz.com. And we are also on Instagram at Ethos Santa Cruz. And we're open
Awesome.
every day. So yeah, find us.
Yeah, go check out Ethos online and in real life. And thank you so much for joining me, Meredith. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Candice. Thanks for all the help you've lent over these last couple of years.
You're welcome.